Hey, hello everybody. It's Tony here. Hope you're out there. We're here for episode 8 of Brush Up Your Shakespeare. We've been calling this season 2 after our hiatus a couple of weeks ago. So this would be episode 2 of season 2, episode 8 technically. Brush Up Your Shakespeare. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you were with us last Friday. I want to thank again Nora Eschenheimer for joining us. We had a great discussion about Rosalind and Viola from As You Like It in Twelfth Night. We talked a lot about those characters in trouser roles in particular. This week, as promised, we are going back to Hamlet, which is where we started in week 1. If you remember way back when, a couple months ago, it's hard to believe. On that note, I hope everybody's holding up okay, weathering the storm. It's nice to have some brilliant weather over the past week, and hopefully that will continue. Be careful when you're outside, and remember, your barbecues this weekend should be socially distanced. But I hope you have a great Memorial weekend ahead, and I hope this will kickstart it. Going back to the greatest play of all time, which is Hamlet. You know my feelings on that. So in week 1, we kind of introduced what we were doing here, and we used the kind of, as I've called it, the greatest soliloquy of all time to kind of talk about as an introduction to how Shakespeare's language works. And again, just to remind everybody, as I like to do at the top of every episode, what the reason for this is, the mission, if you will, of Brush Up Your Shakespeare is twofold, really. It's really one thing that has 2 parts to it. So the one thing is to make our connection between actor and audience with Shakespeare better, clearer, more fun, more alive, and less anxious, and so that's a two-way street. That means actors have to use the language in a way technically in order to invite, to allow the audience in, and the audience should kind of be alive to it and lean forward in their seats and not feel like it's not for them, that it's in some other language. And so we're going to explore in this the techniques, as we have been over these past 8 weeks, and we'll continue to do the techniques necessary for actors to do that and for audiences to allay that fear and to enjoy, because it's really something else once you enjoy it, once you get it out of the way, once you think that you can't or it's not for you, because it is for everybody. So here we are. We're back with Hamlet. We started with to be or not to be. Now, I've been throwing some terms around that I would like to make sure that I'm explaining clearly. And of course, as always, if you have any questions or any comments, you can kind of put them right in there to hear our live chat here on the side, and I'll be looking at that. If you see me kind of veer away from the camera here, it's just to see what's going on. And it's looking good, John tells me, so it means we're live and we're going, because you never know with these things. Again, this is a supremely DIY production. So I wanted to find some terms for you guys and for all of us, so that we, and if you have a question, if you say, I don't know what that means, what are you talking about? Put it up there and I'll try to answer it. So first term, it's a big word that we don't use that often, is that we throw around a lot when we talk about Shakespeare, is the word soliloquy. And what is a soliloquy? And so most of us probably know what that is, but if you don't, it's a monologue. It means one person, but it's a little different. It means one person, one actor is talking, right? The difference between a monologue, and a soliloquy, is that the soliloquy, the actor is alone on stage, right? So the actor is the only person from the production out there, and it's him or her and the audience. Now, in Shakespeare, a rule pretty much, we kind of like to say that not everything's 100%, but is that when you have a soliloquy, you should be talking to the audience. In other words, it's not something that needs to be like it's a spoken voiceover. Sometimes if you see soliloquies in movies, famously in Laurence Olivier's version of Hamlet, which is wonderful, I believe to be or not to be is like in his head, so you kind of see him thinking about it and you hear him as if he's talking to himself, which is a great cinematic technique. Stage, the one thing is that, and that we miss so much right now that we're trying to recreate digitally, is that liveness, and this speech actually meta-theatrically that we're going to look at today, meta-theatrically addresses that in a very, very fun and funny way. So the soliloquy, again, is an actor alone on stage with the audience, with no other actors kind of there to that he or she is kind of conversing with. So in a sense, it enlivens the audience. It's a great device to bring the audience into the play. And certainly in Hamlet, who has a lot of soliloquies, and as a matter of fact, he has 7. One is a kind of soliloquy, and we'll get to that. But he has 7 soliloquies, 4 of which are these kind of major speeches, one of which we've already talked about. So just to kind of bring you up to date, to give you some context, what are those 7 soliloquies in Hamlet? Now, we all know Hamlet has the most lines of any character, I think probably just about in any play ever written, and very, very famous ones, of course. There are 7 soliloquies that begin right at the top of the play, almost the first time we see him. After he's introduced, and we know he's upset. We know he misses his father. We know he's in grief, and then he's left alone on stage as the court leaves, and his mother's just remarried. His uncle, right? He talks to us in the audience, and his first line, very famously, is, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew." So almost the first time that we see Hamlet in the play, he, when he's alone with us, when he's able to confide with us, and very quickly we become, as the audience, his confidant, right? Which is a very important, maybe the most important relationship you could argue in the play, is between the actor playing Hamlet and the audience. So he says this about himself, that he wishes that his solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew, which is a very complex image, but that we're not going to unpack today, but we'll look at somewhere down the line. But he's essentially, for the first time in the play and very early on, telling us that he's, and he's going to explore a level of depression that we know verges on the suicidal because of the grief over his father and where he is in life. So very early on, that is there. And he talks to us about it. He's looking for us to help, to interrogate it. So that's the first of the speeches. The second soliloquy is a shorter one. Right after he meets the ghost of his father, and his father gives him some kind of pretty awful news and instruction. The awful news is, "Your uncle killed me." The instruction is, "Go and revenge my murder." He's left alone on stage when the ghost leaves, and he's with us again, and he tries to explain himself. He says, "Oh, all you host of heaven, oh earth, what else? And may I couple hell," because he's on the ground, couple hell. It's almost like he's copulating with the ground because he's so, and he has to kind of struggle his way up to his feet and get his knee populating with the ground because he's so, and he has to kind of struggle his way up to his feet and get his knees back under him, and so he can kind of go on this mission that his father's asked him to go on. The third soliloquy, which is what we're going to look at today, is the first line of which is, "Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I." And that is a direct kind of echo of that first soliloquy, which was, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt." So this is clear self-loathing continuing, right? "Oh, what a rogue," we know what a rogue is, "and peasant slave am I." So he's castigating himself here, and he's going to go, of all the soliloquies in the play, I will say, having had the great privilege of playing this role, this is the most fun one, I think, to do live, to perform. To be or not to be, maybe the be all end all, to quote him. But this one is an incredibly active speech. It's kind of 2 speeches almost in one, and it's a lot of fun to play. At the end of an incredible scene, Act 2, Scene 2 of Hamlet, which we'll talk about to put in context, that's just a kind of whirlwind of a scene, and one of the best he ever wrote. It's almost a play within itself. His fourth soliloquy, which comes right after this one. As a matter of fact, he does it right in a row. He leaves the stage. There's a short scene, and then he comes back on in Act 3, Scene 1. And of course, that's To Be or Not to Be. That's the fourth soliloquy. His fifth soliloquy later on in the play, after the play has gone, he's made up a play, and he's convinced of his uncle's, he has evidence of his uncle's occulted guilt, as he calls it, is very famously, we've probably heard this line before, "'Tis now the very witching time of night, when churchyards yawn and hell itself breathes out contagion to this world." So he gets very excited, and he starts to kind of go, this is the time because it's dark, and I can now, he's trying to kind of get his blood up to do something horrible, which is to, now that he has the evidence, he can go and kill his uncle and revenge his father's murder, which is the action of the play. Of course, he falters in that. In the next soliloquy, which is shortly thereafter, this is the one that's a little weird, not quite a soliloquy maybe, because Claudius is on stage, and Claudius is praying at the time. He's on his knees and he's praying, and Hamlet comes in going to see his mother and sees Claudius, and he says, the first line is with the audience, with Claudius not knowing he's there. He says, "Now I might do it pat. Now he is a praying, and now I'll do it." And he goes to kill him, and then he realizes he can't because Claudius is praying. Maybe he's confessed himself, and that will allow him passage to heaven, something that was not afforded his father. He wants Claudius to burn hell, so he puts off the deed. We know what happens there. He heads up to see his mom. He thinks Claudius is hiding behind the curtain. It's not Claudius, it's Polonius, and he kills Polonius, in a case of mistaken identity. And then the play completely shifts. Yeah. And then the seventh soliloquy. And the reason why I say that one, the number 6, is not quite because Claudius is there, but he still is talking to the audience in this, where Hamlet's very much saying to the audience, he has 2 focuses. He has the audience and Claudius, even though Claudius doesn't hear him. So it's more of an aside kind of thing. And then the last the big one, another big one is just before he is shipped off to England, he famously stops on his way to the boat by himself and talks to the audience again and says how all occasions do inform against me and spur my dull revenge. It's because he's just seen an army come through led by this other prince who's kind of like him, not really, but he wants to use him as a model of how you act rather than think. And so he decides in that speech to kind of become a man of action in a more thorough and direct and aggressive way. And that doesn't end very well. So those are the 7 soliloquies in Hamlet. John says, I could be in a New York City apartment and count myself the king of infinite space as long as I have GAM Theater Live. Isn't that great? Thank you, John. I hope you all feel that way. That line that John is echoing, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space, is in the scene, actually, that we're about to talk about, Act 2, Scene 2. It's a great, his conversation with his friends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So yes, I thank you, John. I hope that everybody feels that way. I mean, we've got to find ways of making infinite space in our little quarantined nutshells and our little Zoom boxes and YouTube Live boxes. And if Shakespeare can help us do that, then that's great. So, soliloquies, yeah, there are these amazing ways of an actor communicating directly to an audience, right? And as I said in this play, what's so important, why that relationship with Hamlet, his audience, is so important, is that he needs us in the audience to help him understand and interrogate that. He's coming up with these ideas, this plan of action live in front of us, and he wants us to participate in that. Our energy, and sometimes having played it, you actually get kind of response back occasionally. Most of it nonverbal, thankfully. Sometimes someone will throw in a line because they know it before you, of course. But there's a real palpable connection between the actor and the audience here. And it's such a lovely way to open up the language. It's so great that Shakespeare does that right at the top of the play with Hamlet, because he gives him a chance to make that relationship and say, hey, we're in this together. Let's go on this journey over this next few hours. There's going to be a tough one, but I need you in order to do it. And it's all the more richer. It's kind of a metaphor for what we're talking about bridging this gap that we're doing with these episodes of Brush Up Your Shakespeare. So this soliloquy is really great to unpack and take a look at for everybody, because it's fun, it's exciting. It also it's the best example I know of how Shakespeare, how wonderfully he uses pause. And how he tells an actor a lot of stuff. And we've talked about some of the things that Shakespeare does as a writer to direct the actor. And we're going to look in here how he builds tension and builds suspense and builds momentum, and then guts it out on us and uses silence to incredible effect. What we often refer to as a pregnant pause. And this speech is filled with them. And we'll talk about how we know he's doing that. So if you're following along, open up Hamlet, the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, at home, or pull it up on your screen, and looked into Act 2, Scene 2. This speech begins right around line 575 or so, I believe. Like I said, it's a very long scene. It's almost a play within itself. So if we look at just what happens in this, that's much easier said than done. So he's kind of convinced, but he has had this supernatural visiting, and he said to us that that could possibly be something. What if that's not right? What if that didn't really what happened? And the tension in this play, as it builds forward, then becomes about a young man saying, well, I need evidence. I need more than the evidence of my emotions, of this kind of supernatural visiting. I want kind of the evidence, the human evidence that I can actually make before I make a decision, that one must think before they act, right? This is a play about action. Act is a really important word in Shakespeare. It's also a play about acting. We're about to see what that means. It's probably the greatest play, certainly that I know of, about the art of theater and about how we should do it. It's almost an instruction manual. You'll remember, and it's something we'll probably talk about down the line. I'll echo in here a little bit, which is Hamlet's speech to the players before the play, which we're going to get to in a second. So this play is filled with this metaphor of play acting and what that means. And this speech in particular dives deep into that, because the scene welcomes. We get new characters in the scene. Deep into the play, we get a bunch of new characters who are going to become very important to this plot, which are a group of actors. the players, the local theater group, is on the road because the plague is probably in town. We can, all sympathize with that. So they're looking to get out there and make their money. And they come by the castle, knock on the door and say, hey, we've got a couple of things, we're here to entertain the royal family. And Hamlet's a big theater fan. Yeah, we find that out very, very quickly. And that we know that from his friends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, that this may cheer him up. He seems very depressed. In this scene, he has two incredible speeches, two of the greatest speeches ever written. We've got this one we're about to unpack, and earlier, for my money, the best prose speech that I can think of in the theater, which is when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are trying to glean what afflicts him. They've been sent by the king and queen to try to find out what's going on with my son, and they're cagey about it. They're a little kind of suspect, and he's trying, they're trying to beat around the bush, and then Hamlet just comes out and tells them why. He says, I know why you're trying to find this out about me, and I will tell you, so you should have just asked me. And he has a beautiful speech, a very moving speech. It's about depression and what depression looks like. And that even though he understands that the world is beautiful, what he sees in front of him is darkness, and animates the depressive mind. And then there's cheering, because they say, well, if you're feeling this way, if you feel bound in a nutshell, or whatever all those things are, well, you're going to have a great time. You're about to get your spirits lifted because your favorite actors have come to town. So here comes the troupe. The gang rolls in on the pageant wagon, and they get off, and they're tumbling, and they're cartwheeling, and they're juggling, and they're doing whatever. And they say, we're here to entertain you. So he's incredibly, incredibly happy, but he's not looking for the comedies. Yeah, he's not looking for the musicals. He goes right to the lead player, and he says, I want you to perform something for me. Remember that speech that you did in that play? I love that so much. Could you please show it to me right now? And it's not a speech. He doesn't come out and juggle and sing a song. He tells a speech about the Trojan War, and the sack of Troy, and the killing of Priam, and the grief of Hecuba over the slaughtering of her elderly husband. So we all know the story from the Iliad and how that happens. And it's this beautiful speech. Some scholars have intimated that possibly it was a speech that Shakespeare had written for Troilus and Cressida, maybe, and it got cut, and he got his revenge back by putting it in this play and making it even longer than it already is. But it's a beautiful speech, and the plot really hinges on it. And so they all sit to watch the player perform this speech that Hamlet loves so much. Hamlet actually knows it. He actually repeats some of the lines. He tries to cue him in. Hamlet's clearly a kind of wannabe, amateur actor and amateur director too, we find out later, because he thinks he can push the professionals around, and an amateur writer as well, as we're about to find out in a second. So he listens to this speech. Polonius is with him. Polonius gets a little bit upset watching this speech, because which is very important into it. He talks during it. He's kind of the worst audience member you've ever seen. He doesn't really respect what's going on stage, and they have to keep telling him to shut up while it's going on. But then he's moved by it, and he gets upset because the actor is moved, and the actor begins to cry, and he says, "That's enough. He's turned his color. I can't. Let's stop this. Like, he can't." It's too much for him. It hits him too hard. So Shakespeare right there is making a comment, right, about the power and what theater can do, which gives Hamlet a big idea, right? Watching this happen, he gets an idea, and on the he actually says about Polonius, who's a big musical theater fan, he says, "Don't mind him. He's for a jig or a tale of bawdry, or he sleeps." Meaning, if it's not a dance and if it doesn't have a good tune, he's snoring in the back of the theater. So, but anyway, we move on, and he sees this speech, and when they finish it, and he sends the actors off, they're going to put on a play later for everybody. He stops the lead actor and he says to him, "Hey, what if I wrote a couple of lines in that play that you're going to do? Do you know this play? Could you do for me the play called The Murder of Gonzago?" And they go, "Yeah, of course. That's in our repertoire. We can whip that out. No problem." Of course, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And so they need to get paid. So they're like, absolutely. And then an extraordinary thing, which still happens in the theater. "I'll pay if you do my play." Yeah. Hamlet says, "I will, can you mind if I write you a couple of lines? If I wrote 10 or 12 lines to insert in that play, could you put them in there?" He says, "Of course we can do that, right? You're paying us. We'll do whatever you ask us to do." So he's going to write it. So we go, what is he up to? What is he up to here? He's about to tell us. Everybody leaves. He sends his friends off. He sends Polonius off. He says, "Go take care of the actors. And remember," he says, because Polonius says, I will take care of them. I will use them after their dessert." He says, "I will, they're actors. They're going to be put in the barn, and don't worry about it." And he says, No. You got to treat them better than that, because they are actors." He says they are the abstract and brief chronicles of the time. After your death, you had better have had a bad epitaph than their ill report while you live. Yeah. They are the abstract and brief chronicles of the time. They are the abstract, they condense, they can put the 2 hours traffic of the stage, they can tell us who we are. Yeah. And the brief chronicles of the time. Yeah. They are the ones that tell us the story, how important they are to us. It's nice that an aristocrat and someone with Hamlet's resources feels that way about our art form. And he's right. So right away, we know he has this kind of great connection. He sends them off. He's asked about writing he's going to make his amateur playwriting debut. And then he turns to us after he says goodbye. And the wonderful thing about this is he looks at us, surveys the entire audience, and says, now I am alone. Right? We've just watched this 570 line scene so far. It's been breathless, up and down and all around, incredible speeches and and a big kind of entrance of the players in the play. And then there's a vacuum, and it's just us. It's just Hamlet and the audience. And he says, ironically, of course, and meta-theatrically, and Shakespeare's doing this, I bet it got a laugh back at the Globe. Now I am alone, because clearly he's not alone at all. He's talking to however many people happen to be in the theater, So when you do this and you turn and you look at a couple hundred people and say, now I am alone, there's usually like, ha, right? We're acknowledging the theatrical conceit, which he has already built by talking about the power of the theater. It's an amazing, this play is, so about so much, but now I am alone. And then he's going to unleash, right? And we get the first line of this. And as we talked about it in, I think, the first episode. We talked about it echoing the first soliloquy where he says, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt. Here he says, oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. So we've watched him up and down and all around. Then he turns to us, makes this little joke, and then drops. The bucket goes down the well, and the self-loathing is on detonate, right? What a rogue and peasant slave am I? And it begins, we got to remember this with that big O, right? That O, what does that mean? O for a muse of fire, right? We talk about in Henry V. It's a wish, sometimes it's a sigh, yeah. Sometimes it's just it's just this kind of nonverbal utterance of depression, of grief, of hatred, of aggression, yeah. And it comes out with this pretty strong language. But a rogue, he's calling himself this, right? A rogue. We know what that is. Rogues Island, Rhode Island and all that. Bad, kind of, not doing what he's supposed to do always on the other side. And peasant slave am I. That's an emotional feeling. Jennifer asks, which soliloquy, in your opinion, best illustrates that Hamlet is not mad? I don't, that's a great question. Clearly in this one, and we'll talk about that in a minute, he shifts from emotional laceration to a very focused and very rational plan. So he kind of gets all his emotions out, and any of that madness we're talking about that they've fooled around with, he's already had fun at the beginning of the scene with Polonius, and then he comes out and says, get rid of that and let's go forward. So maybe it's this one. We'll see as we go on. That's a great question. Thank you. All right. So, oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I? And we go, oh no, he's back to the self-loathe. Is he going to whine? Yeah, what's he got going on here, right? And then it's because he's going to compare himself to what just happened, right? He says, is it not monstrous that this player here, right? They would call them players rather than actors, the players, right? And I think it's probably even a better, because it's play, right? Isn't that a great word for what we do? Is it not monstrous? Monstrous. He's using big language here, that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, right? So one of the things that this speech does so beautifully is he goes in, Shakespeare loves to use lists and build, and for an actor, it's always playing to the end of that, and that the energy of the speech has to go up, especially as we talk about how he's going to engineer the rhythms of this and engineer the pauses. Now, before we get to the pause, I want to establish something that we talked about in the first episode, and we've talked about since. Remember, the Shakespearean verse line is iambic pentameter or blank verse, which is 10 syllables, right? In a heartbeat kind of rhythm, if it's regular. Yeah. So, oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I, right? Now, we don't say it like that, but that's the built-in underlying structure of it. And that gets into us. That heartbeat gets into us as we hear it. So when Shakespeare breaks it, it means something, right? And we're going to talk about that in a minute with a pause. So here we are using the regular verse line, oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I, right? So what Andrew asks, do you have any advice or guidelines on physicalizing dialogue to provide clarity without crossing the line into outright pantomime? Sure, yeah. Great question, Andrew. Actors ask this all the time. There's a famous scene in the Seagull, Chekhov's amazing play, as one of his first plays. And at the end, Nina, who is an actress in the play, and she's been a professional, and she comes back and she talks about her acting hasn't been good, and she's kind of in the middle of emotional upheaval. And she says famously to Constantine, you know what it's like to not know what to do with your hands, right? Actors, sometimes you see that nervous energy that comes out in actors because the energy. I always say with Shakespeare that he does the work for you because he requires so much energy in the language that if we focus there, that the lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue, and the focus point of it coming like from the right here, from the middle between your eyes, that if we kind of put our energy into that language, there's something about, and know our stuff, that we're going to want to support physically in our bodies and our hands and all of those motions in a way that doesn't become kind of Marcel Marceau kind of fighting against the wind, or, where those symmetrical gestures that actors often do. If I could back this up, it's like on the one hand and on the other, and then I do this. And because I did it on my right hand, I got to do it with my left hand. And that just gets kind of away, and it feels non-human. It doesn't feel present. At the same time, we want our physicality as actors to stay out of the way of the language and support, right? But not, but always feel like it's one. It's got to be one thing. And so sometimes I think the false dichotomy that we often find out in acting class is that we separate the physical and the verbal as if they're different things, and they should be married constantly, right? That there's something about the physical of my life is going to actually fuel how that language is coming out of here and how it's landing on you. And that's a lot. That's a lot of energy. I mean, that's a kind of it's a big, concept, and that takes a lot of acting classes to kind of think about that stuff. But maybe it's a way of thinking, a changing in the way of our thinking can help, So we had a very good answer about physical. Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed the answer. I hope it helps. So back to the speech. Self-loathing, rogue and peasant slave, is it not monstrous? Let me compare myself to this actor, right? Now, what does a player do? A player enacts a fiction, he says, right? It's fake. It's not real. Yeah, it's not real. But remember, we often think that, Shakespeare, where we bring realism and kind of method acting to Shakespeare now, and it's really emotional, it's real. But back in the day when they did Shakespeare, it was pronounced and it was plummy and it was all poetry, and it was, oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I, and hollow and bullshitty, excuse me. And but no, clearly this is this play is 1599 written, and comes out around 1600, 1601, Hamlet. And clearly in this play, Polonius is reacting to this actor doing this speech. The actor begins to cry. The actor has a real emotional thing. So this is interesting, right? In 1600, there's realism, right? The way we think about it. There's an actor actually bringing his emotions, right? His real emotions to it, that it actually gets so real that it upsets Polonius because he likes it to be fake and safe versus someone actually going through something real. Yeah, so it's kind of the first kind of, or maybe not the first, but certainly a door opening on the past that method acting in some form has always been around, even if it's kind of gone like this occasionally, that ultimately the experience is about bringing the truth to the audience, and that truth is always at its densest and most powerful when it's at its most personal for an actor, right? And so this player, the first player, the lead player of this group is quite an actor and quite an artist as well. And Hamlet is acknowledging that. He says, but in a fiction, this is fake. In a dream, and it goes on to define that, right? It climbs. This is that list I was talking about. In a fiction, in a dream of passion. Right? It's a dream. It's something different. Remember, he talked about dreams a lot in To Be or Not to Be. What are dreams? They are nightmares too, right? There's the rub, he says. In this dream of passion, in a fiction, could force his soul, right? Acting is nothing if not the kind of revelation of the soul, right? Could force his soul so to his own conceit, end of line, that from her working all his visage wan. Now he's going to go and tell us what happened. He was so real. He took a fiction and made it reality in front of me, that it was so real to him, even though he's describing something that happened 2,000 years earlier, right? Or more than that. He's saying, this is what happened to this actor in the present moment. And he's going to describe it. So this is one of the first descriptions we get of the actor's craft. He says, all his visage wanned. Yeah. What does that mean? His face, his visage, what he looked like, went pale. Yeah. To wane, to wan. Yeah. Distraction. What does he say? His visage wanned, tears in his eyes. So we know he cried. It's actually tears. Not tears, not faking, but actual tears. Yeah. Tears in his eyes. Distraction in his aspect. His whole, right? And he says his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit. So he breaks it down and then brings it back, right? Tears in his eyes, visage wand, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect. Yeah, he's all distracted. And his whole function. This is an answer for Andrew's question about physicality. His whole function, that's our physicality, suiting with forms meaning like we created. This is an art form, right? To his conceit. Again, the conceit that we all buy into, the suspension of disbelief that what's happening in front of us is actually real. How does it become real? How do we suspend our disbelief? Great actors make us suspend our disbelief because it's real, because it actually is happening in front of us, all of those things. So he's delineating the actor's craft here. It's quite wonderful. And he's really trying to figure it out. And so he has to discover this. Remember, we talked last week a lot about coining. It's so important that Hamlet doesn't already have the review written. He's writing the review right now for us, with us. And hopefully we're agreeing. We're like, that guy was great. That was awesome. I was lost in a play that I know I'm seeing a play about Hamlet, but then I got lost in a meta play, another play within a play, and it's going to be another play within a play in about 20 minutes. Yeah. A play within a play about Priam and about Hecuba, right? And about the Trojan War. So I'm going back even further. He keeps going on. A broken voice, he says, his voice, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with, and all for nothing. So he started with fiction and he ended up with nothing. Yeah. And then he says for Hecuba, not for nothing, for Hecuba. Now, if you could see this line on the page, I wish I could give you a visual right now. Maybe I will. See if you can see this. I don't know if everybody can see that. But you see where it says for Hecuba, yeah? That's a short line. That's it. It's only for Hecuba. That's 4 syllables, right? Where are the other 6? Remember, Iambic Pentameter is a 10-syllable line. So the line before it goes with forms to his conceit and all for nothing. It's a feminine ending, but that's not neither here nor there. And then for Hecuba is the next line, and then there's nothing after that. When when Shakespeare gives us a short line like that, what he's asking us of is to mark the silent, to mark the pause. And if we build that correctly, there's an exclamation point after that Hecuba. If it builds the Hecuba, we suddenly leave the audience almost at the edge of a cliff. It's a great cliffhanger, right? So let's see if we can put that together. He starts with the self-loathing. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. Changes gears, looks to the audience and says, you just saw what I saw. He says, is it not monstrous that this player here, remember, he's a player. We have to hit player there. So we go fake, actor, player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit that from her working, all his visage wand, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit, and all for nothing, for Hecuba. Pause. What's next? Fuck, he's left there. I don't know what to do now. That's crazy. That's revolutionary. And it's important that we have that time with him to go, that man just made magic out of nothing, out of air, out of thin air, to Shakespeare himself, right? Out of thin air. Because he wants to rationalize and interrogate. He says, what's Hecuba to him or he to Hecuba that he should weep for her? Like, he doesn't know Hecuba. He has no connection other than reading a story, and yet he's crying for her, in describing her grief, yeah? That he should weep for her. Remember, he really cried. This is a really good actor. Doesn't mean that crying is only acting. It's sometimes our emotional window into a character is through the actor, and sometimes it's ours. So that doesn't just mean if you turn on the waterworks, it's going to be great acting. But in this case, he's inside of it, right? It's emotional cost. It's drawing us in, and clearly it drew Polonius in so much that he wanted him to stop because it was too much for him to take. That's good acting, yeah? So what's Hecuba to him or he to Hecuba that he should weep for her? What would he do? Now he asks, what is the corollary to that? Remember, we're always building one thought against the other. What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion? Remember, he said a dream of passion earlier. What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? What would he do? That's a good question. And he has to ask us that as if we're going to answer it. And we go, I don't know. What would he do? And he answers for us. He says he would drown the stage with tears. If you think he was going to cry over Hecuba, he wept, he says, right? Weeping is one thing. Drowning the stage with tears is, beyond the nervous breakdown, is the obliteration is of the soul, right? He would drown the stage, incredible metaphor, with tears. And again, the description climbs with this great kind of intense poetic language. Drown the stage with tears, and this is great. Cleave the general ear, meaning all of the ears of the audience. Cleave, what a great verb, right? Remember, we've always got to hit those verbs. Cleave the general ear with horrid speech. Now that's important. He says cleave. If he's going to say drown and not weep, he says cleave and not cut. Cleave, think of what does cleave mean? We know what it means. Get out a meat cleaver. What does that look like? You know, someone comes at me with a knife, I got a shot. A meat cleaver, I'm running the other way, right? Cleave the general ear with horrid speech. That horrid is so important based on his situation, Hamlet's situation. Make mad the guilty in the audience, right? Anybody who fears that connects with that. Appall the free, right? Be the free of conscience. There still be appalled. Oh my God, how could someone do that? Confound the ignorant. Just like, what the hell? You know, the person who just doesn't get it, right? It completely overwhelms them. Yeah. And amaze, indeed, the very faculties of eyes and ears. Yet I pause. Again, another pause. This is great. It's so the structure of this is wonderful. He builds the for Hecuba and he's left there and then he interrogates that and he figures that out and he goes, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to figure this out. And he goes through what an actor does, you know, what he would, and then what he would do if he was me. He would do this. And what would I do? He doesn't have an answer immediately. Yet I pause. Another, that's 2 syllables, long pause. So to go back on that for a second, just to look at and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, right? Make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant and amaze indeed, the very faculties of eyes and ears, yet I left on the cliff again. Yet I, again, now we're going to go back to the beginning of the speech. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. So the I comes back to subject. It's him. Yeah. What am I is the essentialness of this question. He's always asking this, to be or not to be. What am I? Yeah. I am sure you're going to get this, but is Hamlet also commenting on his inability to connect to those around him? What's Ophelia to Hamlet or Hamlet to Ophelia? Certainly. I mean, I think that's probably subconscious at this point. It's a great question, John. I think psychologically, it's always about what he's going through at the time. And you know, he is trying to figure out, because he can't make connections. He has to actually sever himself from all of his intimate relations in order to feign the madness. And we can talk more about that at a different time, that is going to allow him to enact this incredible thing that his father has set him, or the ghost of his father has set him out to do. So yet I, and then he's looking at us and like, what do you think? What am I? He's asking. And maybe we don't say anything back, or we look at him like, oh my God, this is terrible. And he answers the question again for us. Yeah. He says, what am I? A dull and muddy metalled rascal, right? We don't use these, we're muddy metalled anymore, but isn't that great? Muddy metalled rascal. My metal is muddy. Like the kind of ballast that I have, it's unclear. It's, it's not kind of working correctly. I'm all over the place. I'm distracted. I'm scattered. I'm dull, meaning like I can't come out sharp anymore. I'm turning into an idiot. A dull and muddy metalled rascal, which is, we don't use rascal. We taught little kids rascally. We kind of have pat them on the head and send them on their way. But rascal would have meant that, again, an inconsequential kind of like, meandering, scattered guy, right? A dull and muddy metal rascal. He says, peak like John of Dreams. Now, this is a weird image. We go, what does the John of Dreams mean? And how does an actor translate that to me? He says, peak like John of Dreams, unpregnant of my cause and can say nothing. Yeah. So that's it. We got to what John of Dreams, the dreamer. So the rascal, the little kid image is actually great, because then we think of some kid kind of going through life and not really thinking. You're a dreamer. Your teacher says when you're in the back of the room and you kind of, why are you looking out the window? Because it's more interesting than what you're saying up in front of the class is usually the answer to that question. And so the daydreamer, I'm just kind of going through life without engaging it. He's saying, right? Unpregnant of my cause. I should be 9 months with this thing. This is this is the image from Henry V, where he says the foul womb of night. This should give birth to something. I don't have a cause. I'm like, it's not there. I have yet be impregnated with it, though I have it, right? And can say nothing, he says. I can say nothing. This guy is full of all of these things, and I have nothing. I can say nothing. And he says, no, I'm going to even intensify this comparison and can say nothing. No, not for a king, right? Not for the most important guy in the world, not to mention that he's my father, right? No, not for a king, upon whose property, king and property own the whole thing. So it's any offense against the king is offense against the kingdom, and whose dear life, more importantly, this is his father, a damned defeat was made. Isn't that great? Dear life, damned defeat was made. And you can hear him with those D's kind of grinding on that as the tension starts to mount again, as he tries to figure this out. Upon whose property and most dear life, a damned defeat was made. Another question's coming at the audience here. Am I a coward? He asks. Doesn't get an answer. And he's now this connection with the audience is so important because now he's going to kind of want to have a dialogue with us. Am I a coward? Who calls me villain? Breaks my pate across. He's asking the audience, call me what I am. Call me a loser. Smack me in the face. Somebody wake me up. I need it. I deserve it, right? Plucks off my beard, blows it in my face, takes the hair right out, throws it in my face. Yeah. Tweaks me by the nose and gives me the lie in the throat. You are a lie, telling him right in the throat. I'm going to get right down and tell you what you are, as deep as to the lungs, goes right into my body and pulls it out. You are useless. Yeah. Who does me this? He says. And here's another pause, right? He says, who does me this, ends the line, and then ha. Now it could be it's just HA in a lot of the books. Sometimes an actor will do it as as looking for the thing because nobody said anything. So that's great connection with the audience. And it's the third pause in this. So if we build through that, we get tweaks me by the nose, gives me the lie in the throat, as deep as to the lungs. Who does me this? Again, he's out there, just like before with yet I, what am I? This is who does it? Nobody. Nobody takes it up unless you get a really bad audience one night and someone goes, I'll do it. And then the whole play is over. So don't do that. Let Hamlet answers. Be present for him. Be alive. Don't try to make up Shakespeare because you could stall the play. And it's very hard to improvise an iambic pentameter. He asks, who's going to do this for me? And when nobody, hopefully, from the audience takes him up on that offer, he says, swoons, I should take it. I should do it myself. Swoons. What does swoons mean? Sometimes it's swans, or what is that? It's a weird thing. It's an oath. Like I, said bullshit, or something like that. They have their kind of verbal oaths or profanities. This would be taking God's name in vain by saying swoons. It's an elision of God's wounds. God's wounds, man. Like, God damn it. It's like that. He says swoons to the projection. I should take it. I should do it myself, right? For it cannot be, but I am pigeon-livered and lack gall to make oppression bitter, right? That's a great line. What is he talking about? For it must be, it cannot be, but I am pigeon-livered. We know what pigeon-livered is, right? Weak, afraid, scaredy cat, and lack the gall, lack the stuff to make oppression bitter, to work against oppression, to fight against it, yeah? Or ere this, ere is a word he uses all the time for before, or before this, I should have fatted, and there's a pigeon image is going to come back, all the region kites with this slave's offal. Now, that's probably the thorniest part of the speech and maybe the most difficult one for an actor to kind of get across to an audience. He says, to make, or ere this, I should have fatted all the region kites. Now, that says kites, what do we talk? Kite's a bird, right? And so that's a tough one because we hear kite and we think, but kite, I'm sure the word kite that we use when we're flying a kite on a beautiful day like today comes from bird. The region kites with this slave's offal, meaning his offal, his innards, right? And certain birds, predatory birds, will eat fat on, they will prey on, if you see roadkill, here come the vultures or here come the crows. And what do? They sit in the middle of the road until the car comes by and they pick at its innards because it's good, tastes good to them. It's a gourmet meal. So I should have gutted this guy a long time ago and thrown his innards out into this very brutal image, right? So that all the pigeons, the kites, right, you see running, they would be fat with his gore. Now, this image is also going to come back later in the play in a very famous sequence when it's not quite this image, but it's about how a king goes through the guts of a beggar when Hamlet is talking about that we are all, in the end, food for worms. Yeah, and in this case, food for kites or food for vultures. Yeah, food for crows, right? So I should have done this. I should have gutted him already. If this guy, if the player, the actor in fakery, in A Dream of Passion, in a fiction, could do this for Hecuba, how come I can't do it for my father? And so with this slave's offal, he says offal, O-F-F-A-L, which is something most of us don't eat anymore, but we know what it is, the innards. And then and just in case we don't know what offal is, the next word tells us, he says bloody. That's great. This slave's offal, bloody, bawdy villain. And then we get another, we're about to come up to our fourth pause of this, right? He goes on this thing, he's trying to pump himself up like a bad actor. Oftentimes my acting teacher would say, stop pumping up, right? Because we feel we need to be emotional. So we start going, and we get kind of, and you can almost hear yourself hyperventilating to get that emotion up rather than playing action. Yeah. And so he's almost being a bad actor here and trying to kind of work himself up like a football player at halftime when they smack each other's helmets, etc. He's saying bloody, bawdy villain. These are all insults about Claudius. Yeah. Bawdy, we know what that means. He's sleeping with his mother. It's terrible, right? Remorseless. He doesn't have any remorse. Treacherous, lecherous, kindless, all lesses, everything is less with him, nothing more, right? Villain, we've heard that already twice in the speech. This is the third time. Yeah. Remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain. Oh, vengeance. Pause. Now, what's happening there? Bloody body villain. We get that. And then each of these in this list, the important thing for the actors, they have to be different. If we just go remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless, villain, oh, vengeance, it's got nothing. Remorseless is different than treacherous, is different than lecherous, which is even different than body, right? Kindless, they're all different words, and the actor has to kind of make sure that he colors the villainy of Claudius in as many kind of shades as he possibly can, or we're just kind of, shortcutting what Shakespeare's actually written. Yeah. And then, oh, vengeance. Now he's worked himself up. He's colored him. He's made him into such a kind of melodramatic cardboard villain, right? Snidely Whiplash, that he's like, now I've got, oh, vengeance. And he's trying to, with this language, create a way for him to enact this murder, right? This revenge. And so he's claiming, and you in the thing, oh, again, it starts with an, oh, what a rogue and peasant slave. Oh, vengeance. It can't be big enough for my taste in this, that ultimately he's actually trying to call from the heavens, bring me the power to venge, right? To revenge. Yeah. And then a big pause. What's happening in this pause? So let's just go back 1 second. So he says, bloody body villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain. Oh, vengeance. Boom, on the ground, up to the heavens. It's ridiculous. It's melodrama, right? It's absolutely ridiculous. He's in the middle of a theater with his friends he's been talking to all night, and he's on the ground screaming like a banshee, right? And he realizes this in that pause. Like, yet what am I, right? Huh? Someone going to answer me? Oh, vengeance? What happened? He looks up and he looks at us and he realizes we're all looking at him like this. Uh-oh. Time for the rubber room, right? And he acknowledges it in a great reversal. And the next line is so simple after that kind of rollicking, crazy, muscular, bloody body villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain, oh, vengeance, all of these kind of 3-syllable words, and then he just says, in very simple as he can after the pause, why, what an ass am I? And usually it's a huge laugh in the audience if the reversal is played correctly, because we're all going, yeah, you kind of are, right? You got to calm down and let's think of this rationally, which is exactly what he does in a second. He has to unpack this first. He says, what an ass am I? And he's going to explain, isn't this great? He says, this is most brave, that I, the son of a dear father murdered, prompted to my revenge by heaven and hell, right? We don't know quite yet where all this is coming from. Must, like a whore, unpack my heart with words and fall a-cursing like a very drab, a scullion. Yeah? Isn't that great? Must, like a whore, a sex worker, someone who sells themselves for money, but never has a connection because the physical desire is already linked to a consumer transaction. So the only way they can ever unpack their heart in physical love, they can only unpack their heart in what they think or what they say. Yeah. And that's what he's doing when he needs the physical, right? Unpack my heart with words and fall a-cursing. And in my frustration, I just scream at the world, right? Bloody body villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kind, oh, vengeance, right? I scream at the world. I'm like screaming into the wind uselessly. Yeah. Unpack my heart and fall a-cursing like a very drab, right? A scullion, a kitchen worker, one young woman scorned, a kid, a scullion. And then he's had enough of it. And he has this great nonverbal weird line where Shakespeare says, fie upon it, foe, about my brains hum. Which is great. It's and we don't say fee fi fo fum anymore, but these are him kind of trying to figure out non-verbally, getting his head back together. Fie upon it. Oh! It's an expression of frustration. About my brains. Get it back together, kid. Come on, everything get back in. My brains feel like they're coming out of my head, so I've got to figure out a way to put them back. Yeah. About my brains. And then the hum is the way back in. It's almost like an om. It's like I'm going to center myself now. And he comes up again and looks at us and goes, now we're onto the rational track. I got that off my chest. I figured out what I have to do by thinking about what the actor does, and that I have the context, the circumstance in order to enact what I have to act. And he says that guilty creatures, I have heard, he says, that guilty creatures sitting at a play. Isn't that great, right? Because he started with, now I am alone. And we laughed because he's not alone, he's with us. And then he looks at us and he says, I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play like many of you, right? And usually that gets a laugh too. And it really needs to be played for the audience. It's like, we're in this together. It's such a wonderful thing. These are the kinds of things that draw an audience in and draw the actor towards the audience in a way that then loosens those restrictions, as those anxieties, those fears I talked about. Yeah. I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play, and this is very rational, very simple language, have, by the very cunning of the scene, been struck so to the soul comes back earlier, right? From earlier, about the actor's soul, been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions, right? Art imitating life, life imitating art. The actor, that truth is stranger than fiction, or fiction is that our truth, right, is that the performance of something can be so powerful that can act, right, it can bring out. This happens in courtroom drama sometimes. The lawyer does some crazy thing in order to kind of theatrically get the defendant to say, yeah, I killed him and I do it again, but it happens, right, that we're struck by something we see that it makes us feel guilty, right? Been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions, the bad things they did. Yeah. For murder, right? This is so great. For murder, though it have no tongue, will speak with most miraculous organ, right? Murder itself is not a person that can speak, but it will out. The truth will out, he's saying, right? It's going to have to come out somehow. And I have a plan to make that happen. Yeah. I'll have these players, and this is in the middle of a line. He says, for murder, though it have no tongue, will speak with most miraculous organ. Here's my plan. I'll have these players who make fiction, yeah, play something like the murder of my father before mine uncle, right? So I'm going to put on a play, and I'm going to put my uncle in the VIP seats, yeah? This is so great. I'll observe his looks, and I'm going to be hiding. I'll observe his looks. I'll tent him to the quick. Isn't that a great verb? I'll tent him, right? We know what a tent is, enclosure. I'll tent him to the quick. It's like I will attent is probably a short version of attend. I will tend to him, but I love the word that we hear tent, and it kind of, I'm going to capture him. It's going to be a trap, right? A matter of fact, the name of the play, as he says later, is The Mousetrap, right? Not Agatha Christie's, but that's where she got it from, right? I'll tent him to the quick. If he do blench, we know what blanch means. Blench is even, I don't know, it's the same thing. If he, anything on his face that I see, recognition, he gets white, he goes pale, he flushes, right? If he but blench, I know my course. I'm looking for proof. I have to get him to acknowledge his guilt, and then I can do it. I know my course, which is to go forward. And the reason why I'm doing this, because then we're saying, look, your father came to you and told you. You just said your father. Why do you keep procrastinating? There's an argument around this play that often says Hamlet's so inactive and he's so passive, and that's his tragic flaw. That's, yeah, that works, I guess, in acting class. I mean, in literature class, usually. I think he's the most active character in all of literature. And he's the most modern, because action isn't only in physical action, it's in thinking, right? That thinking is action, and matter of fact, to be human, what separates us, he's going to say this in his last great soliloquy, which is how all occasions do inform against me. He will animate this, and he will try on being the opposite thing, being the non-thinking kind of animal. Yeah. The Stanley Kowalski, back with the beasts. Yeah. And it doesn't work for him, right? But thinking is action, which is what Shakespeare's saying, which is an incredibly modern thing. And this is why we say the modern theater kind of is launched here, right? That thinking is action, and not just kind of blood and thunder. You knife me, I knife you. You kill my father, I kill your whole family kind of stuff, which is what we see in the story of the Trojan War, right? If you do blench, I know my course. And here's why. The spirit that I have seen may be a devil, right? And the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape, yea, and perhaps out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very potent with such spirits, abuses me to damn me. Now, that's a really thorny piece, but it's great, right? It's very clear, but it's a long sentence. So it's really important for the actor to use pitch. This is something we've talked a little bit about, and I want to kind of give an example of that right now. He says, the spirit I have seen may be a devil. Pretty simple, right? And the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape. And the sentence isn't over yet. Yea, yes, he says, and perhaps out of my weakness and my melancholy, we know he's in bad shape. He's depressed. In the earlier part of the speech, he told us what his depression looked like. Out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very potent with such spirits, abuses me to damn me. Now, the subject, verb, and object of that sentence is the spirit that I have seen may be a devil, right? And the devil, right, may abuse me to damn me, that the devil may be playing with me, faking that all this happened in order to get me to do something horrible to damn my soul. So the devil's subject abuses me to damn me as the line, but there's all this other stuff in there. So the actor has to make sure that he is navigating through this, right, pitch-wise, so that we as an audience can really follow the subject, verb, and object, no matter what else is in there ornamentally, right? So the spirit that I have seen may be a devil, and the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape. Yea, and perhaps out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very powerful with such spirits, abuses me to damn me, right? So I've got to use pitch in my voice, meaning different notes, in order to delineate, what is an apposite clause, something descriptive, and then something that is the subject, the verb, and the object. So I got to make sure you get the devil may abuse me to damn me, and I have to make sure that he's not doing that, yeah? I'll have grounds more relative than this, than this visitation. I want evidence. I want proof in the human world. I'll have grounds more relative than this. And then the most famous line in this speech, the play's the thing, wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. Very famous line. Theater people love this because it shows how important theater is, that it can actually bring, it is as a harbinger and a conduit of justice. And it's a trial, right? That's why courtroom dramas play so well on stage and play so well in movies, right? There's the back and forth of the trial. And here, because we're looking for evidence, and he's going to get it through the trial of the play. And acting is going to be, so acting in this play, and we'll talk more about this down the road, I'm sure, as we revisit this, becomes an incredible metaphor, right? For sometimes we think about it as hiding as the mask, as pretending, as being something else. And it's all of those things in, support of a fuller, more complex and powerful truth about who we are, right? And it's the point of fiction is not to lie, even though it is, in a sense, a fiction is not a lie. In the way that the connotation of a lie as being a negative thing. A fiction is, a lie somehow made true, right? Made truer through its telling and the revelation that accompanies it when we give ourselves over to art, which is what the audience, which is why, again, when we go back to the beginning of this, now I am alone has to be acknowledged as an irony, so that, in fact, what that line means is now we are together. Now we are here in this together. Let's figure this out. And only we can do it together. The power of the collective, the power of the dynamic between the actor and the audience there is incredibly important. And now Hamlet has a plan, right? I'm sure I don't know if I skipped anything in terms of questions here, but you can always email me if you got something. But there's so much here. We could spend months on this. But now he has a plan. The play is the thing, wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. And he's got that great rhyme at the end. It's the only rhyme in the entire scene. And so we get thing and king, and then boom, and that's a button to launch us in. And we should be excited by then. We started off with this thing. He made a joke, and then he was self-lacerating, and then he was screaming, and he ended up on the floor crying like an idiot, kind of screaming, and then realizes he's a moron and makes fun of himself, and then says, but I have a plan. I just figured it out. I can use this play to find out. And when I find out if he's guilty, then I can go and do it, and it's all over. And then we think, that's great. That makes sense. That's really good. His mistake is that he doesn't do it when he could, and he ends up killing the wrong guy. And then we have the second half of Hamlet, which is its own another whole play on top of it. Just as this speech is almost two speeches in one, the play really is two plays in one. That's a kind of walkthrough. We're right at the end here on this hour of Brush Up Your Shakespeare. We'll be back next week at noontime. And if you have, again, if anybody wants to send me anything on this speech or anything you learned or anything that we've been talking about that I could help delineate, you can write us an email at shakespeare@gamtheater.org, and I'll take a look at that and I'll get back to you. And we'll be back next week. We're working on what the topic is going to be now, but I am going to kind of revisit Hamlet. We spend a lot of time with this. It's a great one to kind of talk about everything you could want to know about Shakespeare is kind of in this play. So I think we'll come back and look at some of these soliloquies down the line. But next week we'll be hopping on to something else. If you have any suggestions, if you have any questions about Shakespeare, like I said, shakespeare@gamtheater.org. Have a great Memorial Day weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next week.